Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics following up the quarterfinals in the OUA and the end of the regular season from the Can West, RCQ, and AUS. We'll break down those games and, of course, so much more. But first, as always, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, my man. Not only did I get my dose of Zach when we went down to watch the Queens Mac game, but we also had a fantastic day at time of recording on Sunday where we got to watch our good friend Dakota Vine don his very nicest Guelph Griffin gear along with that beautiful bucket and run 22 kilometers from York Lions Stadium to Varsity Stadium downtown while I pulled my hair out trying to navigate the roads of Toronto.
Yeah, honestly, I was amazed you still beat us down to Varsity Stadium. Part of me thought that we were going to get there and you were going to be stuck somewhere on Bathurst Street. But it was such a fun thing to do. It was great just when the three of us get together and a beautiful day for the long run. So awesome time seeing you gents as always. And to the folks that were obviously commenting, being like, well, when's Zach doing the ride? And we'll get to that Queens Mac game in a moment and seeing Michael Horvat beforehand and being like, when are you doing the bike ride, man? It's coming. It's coming again. Maybe we'll drop the link for it if we haven't already. The Ted Gavaya Fund, the fundraising initiative we're trying to do in efforts to support that, trying to get up some money towards that as we're building up this event. So again, it is coming, and we will pull through on that as well. Let's get to the OUA action. And we'll start with, so we can move on to the brighter aspects of the quarterfinals that we had this week. The game that we chose to be in the house for. Oh, yes, Tom.
Players of the week.
Players of the week. Goodness gracious, me oh my. Well, we'll still start at the Mac Queens game. Why not? So we can talk about defensive player of the week, or defensive players, as it were, or defensive coordinator of the week. Because, Tom, talk about the day that Coach McManus and his boys put on your McMaster Marauders.
Yeah, we have to give it, maybe call it a cop out, but our player of the week defensively has got to go to Coach Ryan McManus for what that Queens defense did to my McMaster Marauders. 4 interceptions on the day. You see the return of Justin Pace, and he goes 6.5 tackles, a sack, 2.5 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and an interception. Like, a monster day. And then Oliver Jackson with a couple of sacks. Brendan Spence gets in there too. This was a dominant performance from a Queens Gales team that, while you and I had to take off pretty quickly after the game, I did get a couple of direct messages being like, hey man, I know we beat your Marauders. Did you have to take off so fast?
And of course, 2 of those 4 interceptions taken back to the crib for points by Ashton Miller, Melanson, and Keegan Vanek. And 2, Justin Pace. Let me just say the reason we got out quick wasn't Tom wanting to get out of there because of Mac having fallen to your gales. It was because I needed to get home to be sitting with my dad for game 2 of the World Series. So if there's someone to blame, you can blame me. We'll obviously talk about that game in more detail. Of course, another thrill of the weekend was not just riding shotgun with you, but of course, our guy in JT Suey from Football Ontario, taking the drive up there, chilling with him during the game and then driving back. Always a pleasure getting to spend time with him. Truly a privilege getting to, for someone like himself to offer up his time, wanted to hang out with us. So that was awesome. Let's go to the Guelph Western game, where let's start on the offensive side of the ball to give out our offensive player of the week. And, this was a game that, I'll pat myself on the back. I trusted my Griffins to come through on the win, not in the way I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be a high scoring affair. So perhaps an odd game to give out an offensive player of the week, but tell the folks why we're giving out to TA Tristan Aboud for his performance on the day.
I mean, when you look at what he was able to do, 19 for 25, 275 yards, a touchdown, and one, yeah, it was a pretty bad interception with that flick to the end zone type deal, but also getting another 54 on the ground. Could have had that one extra yard to get it 55, but that's okay. His bounce back response after a less than stellar let's say regular season, lots of struggles and things. And not, I don't mean to say that it was his fault that he had a lot of issues. I think we've been pretty clear about what our thoughts are. But to see him play at top form, to look like one of the top three quarterbacks that we have in the OUA, it was really impressive to see. And if it wasn't him, we were going to give it to Isaiah Smith for what he was able to do there as well.
And on the one hand, it's a Western team whose secondary has been getting annihilated over the end of the regular season. So on the one hand, part of my thinking of this could be a good day for them was you maybe get that passing attack to really open up, and just those consistent issues that we've been seeing that, again, someone who knows a lot about receiver play and Guelph receiver play had highlighted coming out of that Laurier game, that these Recs just don't have whatever you want to call it, that is just not allowing them to get open. And part of the case for Isaiah Smith was not just his effectiveness on the ground, but being that outlet when Tristan would look deep, middle, low, and then there's Isaiah as that dump off pass. And again, a clutch play, I think late in the second quarter, where he takes the snap in Guelph's end zone, ends up rolling out, hits Isaiah Smith, and you were highlighting, if not for Buchanan just nearly getting enough hands on Smith, he might be off to the races. But just a clutch play that I don't think Guelph ends up getting points on. But if not for that, they're probably either giving up points or giving up big field position, setting Western up. And in a game that's decided by a Rouge, obviously every point and yard matters. And speaking of the Rouge, Tom, let's highlight again, we're going to look at a unit, not an individual, in looking at our special teams players of the week. Tom, take it away.
Yeah, it's got to go to the speed cover team for the Guelph Griffins on that field goal unit. Yes, Trey Thompson misses the field goal. You say what you want to say about that. He kicked a clutch one earlier on in the game, so I'm not really going to come after him all that much, especially with, there were some struggles, whatever. But the cover team, one of the cover people, I can't remember their name, but are obviously so well coached. They sprint to the pylon, to the edge of the end zone, even before Seth Robertson gets there, to completely hem him in. And there's 3 or 4 Griffins that are on him almost as soon as he catches the ball. So even if that play had been missed, or that field goal had been missed like it was, they were ready and raring to go. That was an incredible job by them, and that's what forced the 1 point and ultimately won them the game.
And this is a special teams unit that we've been critical of. A large part has been due to the disappearance of, at this point, I'm actually just forgetting his name, of say again?
Ben Lane.
Ben Lane, which again, maybe we'll get into more in the offseason when we can confirm the things that we were hearing. So Trey Thompson put into a position kicking field goals and extra points where he wasn't actually his strongest. That obviously played a large part into what this the Achilles heel of this special teams unit was. So I say all that and saying, let's not forget, this is still a coordinator in Donovan Carter, who is as good as any in the game, who's forgotten more about football than generations of players will ever learn. So what we saw validates, of course, all the things that we just know about who the man is coaching up those units. So again, clutch moment by that unit there. We'll get into that game in a moment because we do have to go. We'll start with the one in Kingston. Queens taking out McMaster. Final score in this one, 46-10. I mean, Tom, I say this not in a manner of like the way the teams carried themselves in any form, but Queens outclassed them in the standpoint of, we called it coming in that Queens was actually a couple tiers above Mac. We saw that in their first matchup, week 2, I believe it was. And though certainly Mac has proven us wrong and taken on the call that we thrust upon them, the challenge we thrust upon them, putting them in that bottom tier, and it's still an impressive year for them. And they still obviously were missing LT and Luke Dahlman, and Barizi's shown some good things. This is a tough pill for him to swallow on the day. Like the simple analysis, especially with Justin Pace coming back, is like Mac isn't on Queen's tier. I mean, we'll get into the nitty gritty of it all, but in some regards, and I don't know if that gives you more solace. Like you obviously saw a path to victory for Mac, but like they're just on different tiers. Like and like as the simple analysis, it really comes down to that.
Yeah, when you look at the strength, especially on this Queens defense, what they're known for, how well they can stop teams and what they're able to do, like it's like this Queens team is was Matt McMaster's kryptonite, to be honest with you. You have a younger quarterback that's trying to get the ball down the field and trying to push things, and with a young quarterback, you've got seasoned defensive backs like Keegan Vanek and Asher Miller Melanson that are baiting him into making throws so that they can come downhill and make phenomenal plays, taking that ball away or just taking away areas that Lucas Barisi obviously thought were open. But I I definitely picked with my heart over my head going into last week, and I did foresee absolutely a path for my Marauders to win. Otherwise, I would not have made that pick. But to see 44 back in the lineup, and I know we've already mentioned, his numbers or anything else, but you just get a sense for how much he means to that team and that defense just in general. He was flying around the field just being a dog and really came through in a lot of clutch scenarios where, I'm watching Braden Kelly and he's running into certain, and at times are like, oh man, like he's got something. And then Pace just comes up and he's like, nah, he doesn't. Here's a 2-yard gain at best.
Well, and we were watching from the sidelines and the end zones, which is always a lot of fun. I do typically prefer being in the stands because you can kind of get a better view of what's going on in the trenches, the bigger picture, and sometimes it's hard to tell amongst the massive bodies. So you sometimes just rely on the in-game announcer sort of dictating a bit more specifically what happened, and just the number of times be like, tackle by 44, Justin Pace, tackle for a loss, 44, Justin Pace, and obviously something that we're not unfamiliar with. So it was to no surprise. And honestly, that defense is so stellar. A tough game for Barisi. And as you said, the baiting him into throws, there was opportunities. There was one play down the Mac sideline heading at, I don't really know my cardinal directions in that stadium, but it's on the Max sideline, and Barisi's taking a shot to one of his receivers, and Melanson has him covered on inside leverage, and the receiver has about 3 yards to the sideline. And he made it's a ball that if he doesn't get even over the shoulder of the receiver, it's getting picked off. That ball needs to be between him and the sideline for the opportunity for that back shoulder fade play. And you're quick to just be like, you can't throw that. If you see 24, it doesn't matter if he looks covered, he isn't. And I'm kind of just being like, well, he probably saw that he's got inside leverage. He's got room to the sideline. If you can put that in the phone booth, and I don't want to say that's not a throw that Barisi can make, but it's just that much more challenging against this defense when we talk about this all the time, or we've talked about all the time over the years with Western as sort of the archetype of it, of like, you have to be perfect against them or they're going to not only stymie you, but will make you pay dearly for it. And to me, that was a huge example of where I didn't hate the read, but he had to make the perfect throw. And even some of our best quarterbacks are going to struggle to make that, on top of the fact that it's Miller Melanson on him, which just makes it that much more of a challenge.
Yeah, I've said this before and I'll say it again. If there's a receiver who looks open and 24 for Queens is by him, he's not actually open. And I understand the breakdown that you gave, and I think I completely agree with it. But that is a top tier level throw to be able to make that. That is a very difficult path. And I credit Barisi for even attempting that. Obviously showcases that he doesn't have that fear that some quarterbacks can have about, I see that, but I don't know if I can make it. And he obviously has the arm to get it there, but the precision that takes, let's not forget that back shoulder throw that we're talking about to Jackson Taylor, I believe, he's got like a 5-yard window between Taylor and the sidelines, along with throwing like a 30 or 40-yard bomb. Now, are there quarterbacks that can make that throw? Yeah, absolutely. I think we saw on the other side of the field a quarterback that can make that throw. But that is a very difficult toss to kind of look at. And even one of the other ones, I think the throw was to Everett Reed, where Miller Melanson came up and like it looked like he just bodied the receiver to steal that ball away and to take it for a pick six. And
Big dogged him.
big dog. And it's not necessarily a case of like, oh, the receiver needs to be tougher or whatever, but that's Miller Melanson understanding when he comes in, I'm going to hit this with my body, catch this so that I'm fighting with my entire body while this receiver's fighting with some fingertips, and I'm ripping this thing out and I am gone.
And like, again, that's a guy who like like in a year from now, we might be seeing him getting ready for the CFL playoff run.
Yeah.
Like he could have been in that position this year. Again, I don't know what all that went into the decisions, him coming back, his draft stock, things like that. He's a top tier player, both in his athleticism and his ability to sort of read the play and sort of see what's going on. I do want to highlight what you would point out pretty early on, which was the absence of Greg Palmer on the D line. We saw him go down with injury last week. Help me out. Against Carleton. And to me, that was so monumental in this matchup, because one of the keys that we saw out of their first matchup was Queens using those power reads, just going downhill, Vreek and eyeballing the leverage to the field of the boundary. If he liked the throw to that X receiver, throw it out there if he's got numbers, or if the corner's bailing out, and whether it was Ashby Jacobs or whether it was Nathan Falcone out there, let him with space and possibly a blocker, make something happen. And obviously, if you're just giving it to Jared Cassari to get downhill, that's a great play as well. Now, we've obviously seen this front seven for Mac really show up this year, big for them, and sort of evolve over time. That linebacking core, Lavers, Tony Sostanovic, Isaiah Shields, and all those guys having such a great year. But the evolution of Christian Chuck Wally and of Palmer and of Bolt and these other guys in the middle. And to me, what you just it's. You can pretty much say this about any team, but when you can let Queens establish their run game and now be able to establish those run to reads, and what I felt like I was seeing Max start to do in response to how Queens was how they attacked him last year, in week 2, I should say, was having those corners a little bit tighter. Okay, hey, look, if he's pulling into that, we're either just going to stymie him at the line for like limited gains, if it's the throwing out to that X screen off the power read, or maybe we're coming up with a big play and we're taking it to the crib. But that's then where Queens' next punch was saying, well, okay, they're pressing Logan Walton, they're pressing Falcone, they're pressing Tuioti and all these things. And as you said, though Barisi might not have had the day where he was making those throws, Vreeken certainly can. And the opposite end zone from the play I was describing earlier, where Mac was marching and we saw Miller Melanson with the other play, it was in the third quarter, and I think it was the touchdown to Logan Walton. Like, certainly one of the highlight plays of the year, but it just comes down to he was covered pretty well. There was the safety closing in and there was the corner, I guess, in trail coverage or whatever it was, but he just puts that ball up exactly where it needs to be, like we saw Cal Wither do so effectively against Western last week. Put it up there, put it to the back of the end zone, so it's either going to be a highlight play, or maybe not even a highlight play, but give your guy an opportunity, or it's going out of bounds. And again, I think it was Logan Walton, came down with such a saucy play. But again, it played off of saying that beautiful chess match of, the offensive minds for the offensive minds for Queens and the defensive minds for Mac, which again, the Nesbitt versus Grandy matchup, you gotta love, of trying to say, all right, let's take away those screen looks, but now we can go deep. But again, it all starts with the fact that you're not able to slow down Cassari. He rushes 19 times for 149, a touchdown. That's almost like we take for granted what a strong day that is for so many backs. He can do that in his sleep, and we're kind of like, yeah, it's a good day. So just the way that, my guy and Coach Nez was sort of playing off of Mac's response to them, I thought was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Nez really dialed up a great game, and those Gales executed it to perfection. I mean, when you look at it exactly like you were talking about, in the first few drives, a lot of those are powers to the field, and Cassari's hitting the gaps, and it's a 7-yard gain, it's an 8-yard gain, and they're big plays. And then right afterwards, you and I were kind of discussing our, regardless of how you feel for it, Vreeken goes to give that power again, completely turns around and rips out the X screen, and that takes off for a little bit. And now once again, as a defense, you get into that, okay, if we really wanted to commit, we could probably stop or limit the run, but we give up the wide side of the field, or we give up the flats, and that's where that screen comes into play. And then, okay, you know what? We're just going to bring everybody downhill. We're going to take away both of those things. Let me show you how it's done. Freaking tossing that ball up to Logan Walton. And exactly like you said, we were probably 10 feet away from that catch. We had the perfect view. And I know I'm the Mac guy and I'm cheering for Mac, but even I couldn't help out just, oh, because it was an incredible catch. Logan turns at the perfect time, high points the ball over two defenders, and then brings it down securely. Man, that is how it's done. And they looked crisp when they were doing that. The last two games that Queens had played against Guelph and against Windsor, even in the win against Guelph, both the teams that we talked to, not just the from what we saw, but talking to the Gales, they had mentioned, yeah, that was not our best game. Even in the win, that was not our best game. Lots of things to clean up. This, I think, was one of their best games from start to finish. Offense, defense, and special teams. They looked really good.
Last thing in terms of what we were seeing being there on field level, at one point we're sort of making our way from one end zone to the other, and we're going behind the Mac bench. And though you were quick to point out when we saw the teams in their warm-ups, there's 2-4 for Mac, Carter Blad, fully suited up. And he obviously has been dealing with some injury this year. Veteran guy. We know just what the accumulation of those hits over a career can do to your body. And you had mentioned like the way they use certain packages was probably the limiting factor there. I imagine the injury piece is probably a part of it as well. Would have, and maybe I'm just misremembering, would have loved to have seen him in a little bit more. And maybe it is just an injury and it's limiting him, but on the assumption, obviously, we'll do the post-mortem, the exit meeting with Mac, as we'll do with all these teams, to go over the career that he had, because I believe he's now hanging them up. But, I guess I say all that in saying, for whatever the reason that he was maybe a bit limited, a cool moment to know that we were in the house for Carter Blad's last football game for the Maroon. And I'll throw in as well, also, not really to a terrible surprise, because we know how good Jazz Kyra and Nicholas Henning are, but as good a year as Christian Chuckwally's had, those guys were getting their bear paws on him, and he really wasn't getting much of a pass rush, which when we compare how Windsor was able to have success against them, and well, no one's pass rushed as well as Windsor has this year. And Mac is actually second to them, I believe, though it's that 20, or if you according to Brett Hedges, it's actually more than 38 sacks. It should be in the 40 category, so maybe more than 20 plus on where Mac was at. But again, I'll leave it at this, to sort of those couple points there, that Carter Blad, again, salute to you, and what a great career he's had there in the maroon and silver. But just though it was maybe Chuckwally kind of trial by fire in this against those immensely huge tackles, whether it was some of these younger receivers going up against these incredible defensive backs, the youth, the potential for this Mac team based on the youth, and now having gotten their tail handed to them in back-to-back playoff runs at Western and at Queens, add in the leadership there, which is going to be able to try to utilize that, of saying, we can only get better from these things, and we will. We have to get better. I still hold that the future for this Mac team is so, so bright.
Yeah, I have to be, obviously, Queens took it to them, and they looked really good while they're doing that. But exactly like you mentioned, the youth that's on this team and the positives that I saw, even in a loss like this, was outstanding. I mean, this is a Mac team that defensively still finished with 8.5 tackles for loss, getting into the backfield and tackling Kasari or anybody else before they could really get things going. I think that's a great sign of what this Grandy-led defense can really lead to here. And even the finally seeing the growth, or not the growth, but the production from Jackson Taylor. And yes, the ball out that we were talking, that Barisi tried to throw to Taylor, and that really tight back shoulder throw was incomplete. The fact that he is saying, this is one of the best receivers on the field, period. Let me try to get him the ball any way that I can, even if it's just up there, and let him go try to make a play. He finished with 3 catches for 70 yards and doesn't get into the end zone, but even just that is enough to start waning most teams to start looking over at Taylor being like, okay, we really got to make sure we're monitoring this guy. I'm pretty sure if I saw that correctly, at least in some cases, Ashton Miller Melanson is the one who's trailing Taylor for the most part of the game, which that's a hell of a matchup right then and there. But I think that there's a lot of really positive things to pull from this. And a big part of not just Queens looking dominant was this game, Mac was just showing their youth. You know, the 4 interceptions by Barisi, not all of them are on him. There was one that was a tip ball that I think Vanek was able to pick up in there. You know, you could argue on whether or not you should be throwing that ball, but regardless. And then there's a couple of fumbles that happen as well. I believe one was on a punt return. And those are just mistakes that you can't make against the elite teams like Queens really showed here. But I think that there's a lot of bright spots for this McMaster team. I cannot wait to see what they could grow and continue to get better and better going into next year. But if nothing else, if I'm Mac, as the players themselves, I'm hoping that this opens your eyes, if you hadn't seen it already, to what the difference between a playoff and Yates Cup caliber team looks like and where you have to get to next year.
And I don't think they're that far away from being in that position. And you talk about the injuries, talking with some of the Mac folks, my guy Zaid, another London South guy who's actually not playing football anymore, but he's in kin and he's one of the therapists or trainers with the team, and asking him about his former teammate and my boy Noah Amaral, and the word seems to be that he's back healthy. He just wasn't quite ready to be at game speed yet. So the fact that he's coming back off of that injury, ready for next year. Again, we'll kind of go over the Braden Kelly's, Micah Duchesne's, where they're at with their status. That O-line just growing that much more. Like, again, we'll talk more about this Mac team, but we've been doing it all year, and we'll do it again now, and we'll do it again later. OUA football, be on alert for this McMaster Mirage team going into 2026. But for now, salute to you. Great job, Coach P and your staff. We ain't going to talk about you for a while now. Let's switch gears and head down to the Forest City, London, Ontario, where the Western Mustangs were hosting the Guelph Griffins. You know what? I haven't done it in a while. It's been a while since I felt like the bad juju. Sorry, let's try that again. They were hosting my Guelph Griffins. Your Guelph Griffins.
Everybody's Guelph Griffins.
And losing by a play that's no longer going to be in Canadian football in about 2 years' time. The beautiful Rouge, my favorite color now. It used to be purple, no longer. Guelph out there looking like the Les Rouges et Or of Laval. And if you were going to try to take out Western, it would be by dressing like the team that typically has their number in Laval. Final score, Guelph 18, Western 17. Tom, a game that, as we alluded to in giving Tristan Aboud the player of the week, offensive player of the week, I thought Guelph would pull it out. I thought it was going to be a higher scoring affair than we had. It felt, both teams kind of were looking the way I had been critical of Guelph looking. And so to no surprise, Guelph was looking like they were looking of moving the ball, chunk yardage at times, but then just getting stymied a little bit along the way. Obviously, some turnover issues for the Guelph Griffins, one of which by Longo, which he'd been dealing with some injury this year. So great to see him in there, and looked a little banged up as well, though. Sorry, Longo, you got a whole offseason now to get better. Your season's done. Which then led to the scoop and score, by the kid in Jackson McKay. But overall, a game that just had that feeling of, though they haven't necessarily looked like it down the stretch, just two heavyweights trading blow for blow. Guelph offensively really coming on strong late. And again, a large product was, as we've seen all year, Tristan Aboud having that quicker trigger on saying, nope, I'm gone. I got to use my legs. And the checkdowns to Isaiah Smith. And, it hasn't been my favorite thing seeing throughout the year how productive Isaiah has been in the passing game, only because it's one thing where it's like if that's complementary to you being, the ground and pound, run dudes over guy in the backfield, and then you're leaking out. The fact that he got back to that Isaiah Smith in terms of, I mean, that final touchdown for him was such a thing of beauty. I believe 28-yard scamper for his one touchdown there, and then being that outlet for Guelph really triggered them in the fourth quarter. And that defense for them really came up big in slowing down this Western offense that at times, especially coming out of the second half, or pardon me, in the third quarter, I should say, was starting to move the ball effectively and kind of, was really scaring me watching it. So it had that heavyweight look to it, but in the fourth quarter, Guelph really came up and dominated big time.
Yeah, I have to say my ultimate favorite player on the field to really watch was Isaiah Smith, like you mentioned. And finally, we're getting back to him showcasing how big and strong and powerful he can be here. There's a few times previously earlier in the year where he's trying to avoid guys and trying to get around and use the speed, and he has the speed, don't get me wrong, but there was a number of times in this game in particular where he's looking at it being like, that's an arm tackle. An arm tackle is not good enough to take me down. I'm going to run through that. And that's really what separates, I think, the great backs from the good backs. And that same thing of, we had, you and I both had the chance to block for running backs like that. Chris Pizzetta and Wayne Moore for me, who are guys that are just going to come downhill and break an arm tackle. Johnny Augustine and Rob Farquharson for you. You're not taking those guys down with just an arm tackle. And those are the guys that had the vision to say, you know what, if there is a linebacker that's in the hole, yeah, I'm going to try to bounce it outside to gain some more yards. But one arm that's sticking out in the gap, nah, that's not good enough to take me down, and I'm going head down. And that's what Isaiah Smith was doing in this game. It was so great to see finally showcasing, man, you are Canada's Saquon Barkley, man. Let's see it. I know Saquon got famous for the hurdle, the backwards hurdle, but he really made his money running dudes over. I want to see that more of that from Isaiah Smith. I think the more he does that, the better this team does.
For Western offensively, Evan with a much better day than he had shown certainly last week against Laurier, 15 for 23, 208 and a touchdown, and a day that on many occasions is enough to be able to win them some games when that rushing attack is as formidable as it's been. And certainly a strong day for Ethan Dolby, the 21 carries for 124, doesn't get into the end zone. I'd be curious. I wish I did this before the fact that we're recording now, the last time Western didn't rush for a touchdown. I'd be curious to see what those numbers look like. And obviously reconnecting with Seth Robertson on, a beautiful play drawn up by Gaten Richard where they get the inside receiver running a slant or a post, taking the safety over, and there goes Seth on a post right behind it, bullet in the middle of the field. And again, going back to this whole piece on, I do want to recognize that Evan has dealt with some injuries through the latter part of his career and has dealt with injuries this year. But some of these balls are it's coming out of the jugs machine. It's on point. It's to his guy. But at the same time, still seeing moments where early on he's got a guy open and the ball's in the dirt. The ball's at his feet. And it's just this piece on, I don't really know what to account for it, because we've obviously seen him at the mountaintop, the peak of not just OUA, but USports football and playing such a high level. I don't know what to account for. I'm happy though, of course, it's, we'll do our postmortems and everything. Again, we're a lot of players on this Western Mustang team who this is now their final game for them. Evan, as significant as the rest of them. But what did you make of the day Evan had? Obviously doing some positive things, but not quite doing enough to get the job done. And, being held to 17 points against a Guelph defense that by the names and by some of the numbers we say is really strong, but also they're missing Johnny Green in this game, right? I'm trying to remember. I think some other players that they were missing in this game too, but that was perhaps the most notable name. We saw Braden McDougall look a little gimpy at times as well. But what did you make of Evan's performance on the day, coming off of undoubtedly his probably his worst game ever playing football at any level against Laurier?
Yeah, I really love to see the bounce back from him. 15 for 23, 208 and the touchdown. And like you said, there are some balls that he's throwing that are not on target, but there was one, I think it was one of the first plays. He throws the ball. Yeah, I think it was the very first play. He throws the ball out to Braden Masseri, and it's a little bit too far outside, and Masseri can't get to it, and it's an incompletion. They do a quick zoom in right on Evan, and he does what like something like this, like he's like just scratching his elbow, but he does make an effort to touch his elbow as he goes, and that to me is enough to say that there's something going on with that elbow. I think he had surgery or he had some kind of procedure on it in the off season, and I was told he's 100%, he's good to go, he's whatever. But I think there's something going on with that, which would explain why you don't obviously don't gain a lot of power from your elbow, but you gain that direction from where it's thrown. So if that's hurting for him, or if that's not at its strongest, whatever, maybe that's what's taking and pulling his throws a little bit, going back and forth. But just really nice to see him have a closer game to what we come to expect from him. I think Ethan Dolby, 21 attempts for 124 on the ground. It's good, but I think it's a little misleading because this Guelph Griffin defense did a hell of a job stopping and limiting the run in a lot of key scenarios here. And I'm glad you mentioned him, Braden McDougall. Sometimes just straight up shooting the gaps. There was a power that was towards his side. He slips Reed Cloutier. He slips the pulling guard that's coming across to go for the end, and he completely tackles Dolby in the backfield. It was an incredible play and one of many that this Griffin defense was able to make. So credit to Dolby for still getting over 120 yards rushing here, but that Guelph Griffin run defense was outstanding.
And it comes back to that piece that we were discussing, not to say that, this is what Coach Barry was necessarily game planning for this one, but if you can slow them down on the run to not allow them to open up those play action looks, you're certainly defanging them to some extent. And though we saw Tumi Adieni come out a little bit in the middle, I actually wanted to throw you the name Nicholas Parchenko to talk about what he did, because he only ends up with 1.5 tackles, but a couple plays where he's just getting that big extension on whoever it was in the middle, and just either again forcing Dolby to try to jump cut into the next gap, and that's maybe where you then have your McDougall's or your Eunice Larry's being able to fill in and make the actual tackle, or again in the 1.5 times he's getting those big bear paws on the guys. I thought he had, and this is a guy that you obviously were around in your time at Guelph, who I think had such a monumental game for them, though as often is the case with interior linemen, not reflected necessarily in the stats.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Parchenko's name. Party, my guy. Getting that big bench press that he has. He's one of the strongest dudes on that D line for sure. And benching off, I think the play that I remember that I love so much, he's going up against Cote, the center, and he works the perfect bench off and then just sticks an arm out. And we just made a mention of like, oh yeah, you got to break those arm tackles, where he sticks an arm out and essentially like gets Dolby to almost like a headlock and just grabs him and pulls him right down to the ground. And he just owned the gaps that he was responsible for in that run game, exactly like you mentioned. And when you can't afford to have an offensive lineman leave off of a double team for fear that that D lineman's going to make a play, that's what leaves those linebackers free to make those plays and to get into the backfield. So he had a phenomenal day. I really love the fact that you brought his name up because he's my guy. I had a chance to coach him when he was still an offensive lineman when I was on that team, and the growth that I've seen from him as a defensive lineman has been outstanding.
Now, obviously, for Guelph, still a bit banged up, still no Donovan Malloy, seeing, not major production from Mason Duval, but some clutch runs at times to pick up a first down. The usage of Marshall McRae a bit more limited, and a great job by Western on at least one, but maybe 2 times, if I'm remembering correctly, really shutting the door. So again, like Western and Guelph are great matchups. And, I picked Guelph twice to beat them this year and came only true on this one. That first one to me is more of an outlier of what we typically see when these two teams match up, save for the 2017 Yates Cup. Wasn't too pretty, but we didn't even talk about that game. Let's go to the end of the game and a couple of the sequences that obviously led to the Guelph win that maybe highlight some issues of youth for Western both as terms of players and actually maybe even their coaching staff. And they actually have a lot of young coaches out there. And I'm not going to say any of this as a way of calling folks out. But starting with the first touchdown they scored of the two in the fourth quarter, the one to Jackson Zerby, where it looks like, I don't know if the camera panned to it after the ball already got to him. So I don't know if he's running a comeback, a deep out, whatever it was. But Zarby catches the ball 10, 15 yards from the end zone, no one remotely near him. And like whatever concept they might have been calling up to maybe run off some DBs and then look for him underneath. Again, I don't know what they ran. Also, again, shout out to the Western Mustang TV broadcast and now getting like those end zone cuts. And, you have Todd McKay with the marker on there doing his best John Madden, which was so cool to see. And again, being there last week and seeing all the production work that goes into it. Few schools, frankly, no schools match it in the OUA from what they do there. But we talk about the youth in the secondary, partly the point of being like, you know what? The reasons we gave Tristan Aboud Player of the Week, I stand by, but there's also part of me being like, we couldn't have done a little bit more against this team that's been shown to be very vulnerable in that aspect. No more were they vulnerable on that moment. I mean, a couple other balls where Tristan had some guys coming deep down on like some seam looks that or some fades between like a safety and a deep corner. One, I can't remember to who he hit. One, there was the big play where the two DBs kind of collided, and I forget who it was that came down with it. One where I think it was Jacob Thomas that, it was kind of the phone booth over the shoulder, Willie May style catch. He doesn't come down with it. But put all that aside, the Jackson Zarby touchdown where he is left completely alone and then is able to just get downhill and get into the end zone. Hard to tell exactly what went down on there, but given the struggles we've seen with Western in the defensive secondary, it almost seemed fitting, I suppose, that if Guelph was going to come up with a big play, it would be in that matchup at the same time with a group for Guelph that had really not performed the way that we had expected them to on the year, though.
Yeah, it was really great to see these Guelph receivers come up with some really big plays, and obviously the one to Zerby really helping them to get the ultimate touchdown and to lead to that Guelph victory. But even like Jacob Thomas, the 6 catches for 94 yards, Isaiah Smith, obviously. It was just great to see a receiving core that seemed to really step up in key moments and in key situations. Even like a Josh Mashnagi, a fullback, an H-back, his first catch of the year, and it's up the seam for a 17-yard gain. Things like that was awesome to see. But exactly like you mentioned it, there was a number of times, and that one that highlighted Zerby, but there's a few times where Aboud finds those Guelph players and those receivers, and there's like 5-10 yards of separation. And I get the fact that Western's playing a zone and sometimes a deep zone, especially because Aboud's got the arm talent to throw it deep. But it just feels like they are really going like super far back to try and stop everything. And maybe it's because there was a couple of deep balls that were thrown previously, and Aboud showed the fact that he's willing to throw that far, whatever. But yeah, I like you mentioned, we didn't quite get the camera angle. Obviously, we didn't really get to see what happened and why that led to that. But a massive play and the desperation to make that touchdown. I don't know if you got the same feeling, but watching this game, there was so much to me, even through the broadcast. It felt like Western had this confidence that, somebody's going to make a play. Something's going to happen and somebody's going to make a play. And on defense, there was a number of times where like Max von Muhldorf or Soren Holschmidt had another great game as well. But they come through, they make a tackle, and then there's something of oh, okay, there it is. Like now we're getting back to business. Or, there's a beautiful catch from Braden Masseri in between two Guelph defenders down in the middle of the field. And there's a big play there. And you go, oh, okay, yeah, there it is. There's that Western thing. Like, yeah, we're going to come away with this one. And there was almost like a collective at times, like a looking around on the field, like, okay, who's going to make this big play? And nobody was stepping up to do that. And then that's where Guelph was making enough plays to get into the game and to really finish this off. I don't know if you got the same feeling or if you felt the same way I did, but it very much felt like, yeah, we're okay. Somebody's going to make that play. And then eventually somebody didn't, and Guelph did.
I don't know if I picked up on that in the moment. I think maybe, though, if what you're seeing maybe reflects, as we talked about and just sort of speculating, how is this team going to bounce back off of the worst loss the franchise has ever had? maybe like in decades, if nothing more. At least in the point separation, we know that they've had some bad losses in some of those national semifinals. Again, I think back to that Montreal game where it was just they looked listless against the Carabin on their route to, of course, a Vanier Cup. Now, of course, the play we got to talk about, we highlighted that cover team because obviously they knew off the jump and like like I'm not trying to be mean to the kid. Is there part of me where maybe DC or someone on that staff pulls that? Well, maybe Trey Thompson's kicking him into the mesh, pulls him over, and be like, guys, cover. And like they got down to the 28. Like the one he hit earlier, as you said, was from like 40 something yards. Like I forget what they had said on the broadcast. His previous record was on the year, far further than he had done elsewhere. So like again, he's showing that he has the leg, just hasn't shown he has the consistency. And as we've talked about, he had been put in this position much. I don't know if unfairly is the word I want to use because I don't know. We're talking about sports. Fair, obviously is a thing we talk about, but it is what it is. But a great job by Guelph on the cover. And again, this is where I'm not trying to be going at the guy, but as we were talking about in the car coming back from Queens, as we're seeing the end of this game and highlighting that, Miles Milano being a pretty young guy, former player for these Western Mustangs, leading these special teams units. Like, yes, great job by Guelph, but it's got to be said, like, for a guy, on the one hand, a guy of Seth's veteran status, you'd kind of hope that he just knows that already. But I think that was coming off a timeout, if I remember correctly. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but like nonetheless, like Seth's the guy that you put out there, and we were talking about this on the ride back. Those Friday walkthrough practices, often where you're going through those very specific moments, whether it's you joking about doing the sort of, to quote from The Longest Yard, the schoolyard bull snuff type play of just like some rugby style laterals to try and get a last moment play in the end zone. Or what do you do when you get an interception in the end zone, a punt, or a field goal at a tie game, or maybe you're up by a point and you don't want to either tie it or lose the game, to know like if you can't get it out, do you have the opportunity to kick it out? And again, I haven't gone back to watch it that many times to say, like, maybe they just got down there so quickly that the prospect of kicking it is like, shoot, like maybe they're going to block it. But at that point, anyways, not getting it out's as good as them blocking you trying to punt it out of the end zone. So there's part of me that with a guy as good as Seth is, and again, I feel bad saying it like this, where I kind of expect, given that he's been a great returner for them and someone who's been a veteran in those key spots. But then also you wonder, like, some young guys in some key spots on that coaching staff as well. Was that conversation had going into that moment? Part of me, it feels ridiculous saying it. Like, how could you not have had that conversation? But then it goes back to like, well, then if Seth was told that, reminded that, I'm assuming it was McIntosh or Mazzari as the other returner. I don't know. Like, these guys must have known that. And if they did know that, why wouldn't they have done it? Like, anyways, again, without trying to be rude to any of the people within that, I just figured we had to talk about that.
Yeah, 100%. It ultimately decided the game. You have to focus on that. And I think if I'm putting myself into Seth's shoes, of course he's understanding I got to get this out of the end zone. I don't think that kicking the ball is obviously the first thing that's come to his mind, but I think any other team, or at least most teams, when the ball is kicked on a field goal, you have that half second or however long where the cover team is looking up to see if the field goal goes through. And then when they realize it doesn't go through, then they go down and they make that cover. And that split second delay in that time while Seth is still tracking the ball, even if it's not in his hands yet, is oftentimes enough for somebody as fast as Seth to get out and to get out of the end zone. And then we're going into overtime where anything can kind of happen here. I'd have to double check and looking back at the tape, but it felt like the moment the ball was kicked, that cover team was out, regardless of it had been made or not. And so as Seth catches the ball, he's going to the sidelines, he immediately sees a Guelph defender who's already there, goes to turn back around and trying to reverse it the other way, and sees the three other Griffins, and then panics for a second, not wanting to, I'm sure, get the ball blocked or whatever, like wanting to save something. But then at the end of it, he's about to get tackled, he's out of bounds, and he just tries to throw the ball, just tries to do something. But I have to imagine that He thought he was going to have a little bit more time and trusted in his legs and his speed to get out there. But exactly like you kind of mentioned, we at Mac, we used to do these Friday walkthrough, and it was, the last little bit of practice was situational. Okay, we're down by one. What are we going to do? And the offense tries to punt the ball into the end zone, and the defense jumps up, bats it down, and then boots it back out of bounds. And so they they can win the game or whatever. And it was a fun way to end practice to keep things light, but it was also situational. Like, okay, if we are down by one with 1 second left, like expect this to happen. This is what we have to do here. If we're down by three, we got to get into range, or, if we're down by five or more, we got to get that schoolyard BS to try to find any way to get into the end zone. And it was a factor, it was a piece that was always ingrained. This is what we do on Friday practices. And so if that ever happened during a game, all of our defense or anybody on the field would know that's what's going on. Obviously, you can't speak to how everybody prepares or whatever, but have to imagine if Seth was just under the impression or even told, or even if he thought about on his own, whatever, I just have to get this ball out of bounds. The moment I catch it, I can just punt it out of bounds, as long as it goes past the end zone and we're good to go. I don't know. I don't want this play to be a reflection on Seth Robertson, because he is one of the best receivers that Western has ever had. And I don't want people's thought of him to be, oh, well, he should have just kicked the ball out of bounds. So my heart hurts for him in that scenario, because ultimately I'm sure there will be some people who thinks that way. But man, you talk about how awesome it was to cover this Western Mustang squad. And yes, everybody hates Western, whatever. To see the growth and to see the success that Evan Hillock, Seth Robertson, Brady Masseri, Max von Muhldorfer, all of those senior guys had was truly incredible. And to be on the sidelines and to watch them happen. So my heart goes out to Seth Robertson, and the rest of this Western squad for exactly that reason.
What a wild way for Guelph to end their regular season and advance to the next playoff round, in which they knock out, was it Cairo Berry at the 1 yard line to prevent them from tying that game late, which was a win or go home game for them, a playoff game in essence, and then essentially knocking Seth Robertson out of bounds, trying to get out of the end zone by a yard or two, with again the prospect of not giving up the game-winning rouge on that. These, Guelph Griffins, say what you want about how they went down the stretch and the up and down nature. There's something to be said about teams that are, get those have those high emotional wins, and like, hey, look, we can win in some pretty significant moments.
Hey, listen, at the end of the day, Guelph Griffins, as the McMaster Marauder, you are welcome for getting into the playoffs. If we don't beat Carleton, you don't make the playoffs, period. And then you get this historic win. So really think the next time you see those boys in maroon, just give them a quick thanks to help get you into the playoffs so that you could upset the Western Mustangs.
Oh, yeah, they'll give you a nice Bronx salute. That's certainly what they'll give to any McMaster Marauder players. They're saying Guelph books their ticket to Kitchener-Waterloo to take on the #1 ranked Laurier Golden Hawks. Didn't mention it following up the Mac Queens breakdown. Queens booking their ticket to the end of the 401. And that's where we're going to go now, Tom, to a little place called Little Rock, Arkansas, under the shadow of the Golden Arches. Win City, Ontario, under the coaching, the tutelage, the mentorship of one JP, the Don Cercelli. Windsor, Ontario, home to the Windsor Lancers with the bluest of blue collars, the goldest of gold swaggers. Come up true on this day, taking out the Ottawa Gigi's. Final score, Windsor 31, Ottawa 24. Somehow, some way, these teams give us all-timers whenever they match up. Maybe the travel's part of it. Maybe it's the coaching staffs and just knowing that they're going to be set up for success with that, the strong leadership that they have there. Whatever it is, it was great to see Ottawa, much like we talked about with Evan having a bounce back game himself, Ottawa as a team having a bounce back game in the loss, given how their season went post bye week in the sort of tail end of the season. Tom, this Windsor team is as hot as anybody right now. And as we talked about when this game went final, they go from not only taking care of business on that end of season road trip that we highlighted was as just rude a thing for the OUA to do to anybody as they could have, with them going to Ottawa, coming home, then going to Queens to finish up their season. But in pulling off both those wins, earned Ottawa having to come to their house. And as important as that, given that they picked up the win, now gets Queens to come back to their house. Amazing to think in the last month of football, when it's all said and done, leading into the Yates Cup, regardless of what those outcomes are going to be, that Windsor will have played Ottawa and Queens twice, two very strong clubs. Despite how Ottawa had sputtered down the end, they nearly came back against them in that game in the nation's capital a couple weeks back. Earned their right to then host those teams, took care of business on the first one, and man, oh man, I mean, not to get ahead of the round two preview podcast, but setting up probably one of the best matches we're going to have in USports next weekend with Queens visiting them. But let's start with this matchup. What are your first thoughts, first impressions with the win coming out of Alumni Field in Windsor, Ontario?
We've mentioned this a few times over the years. Man, is Waybe Mumbo a phenomenal running back. 11 carries for 109 yards and the touchdown. I think he had another really great game. And just this entire Windsor team. I mean, even when you look at Nick Dubofsky, 13 of 20, 169 yards, one touchdown and no interceptions. You know, you and I have tried to hold Domofsky to a higher standard and saying, you know, we expected a whole lot more from you. We expected that production to be good enough or higher or whatever else. The fact of the matter is, when that defense plays as well as they did, that stat line from Domofsky is good enough to win football games, as they've done like time after time after time during the regular season and now into the playoffs. With how good that Windsor defense is and how good this rushing attack seems to be for Windsor's offense, Domofsky is not being asked to, you know, save the game and to throw for 400 yards and a bunch of touchdowns, whatever. It's just do enough, don't make mistakes, and be that game manager, and everything else would kind of fall into place. And that's exactly what he did in this one. And this was a great team win for Windsor.
And I love how both these teams, obviously being very familiar with the other from playing each other 2 weeks ago, or whatever it was, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, schemed up some things to try to give themselves good looks. On the Windsor side of it, I loved how, you know, we talk about how great that boundary coverage side is for Ottawa with Patrick Cumberbatch, with Denny Ferdinand. And so what's Windsor saying? Well, you know what? We're going to go a lot of quads to the field and stick our big tight end, Mateo Trife, in there on the boundary side. And then, by the way, what we're still going to do, though, is either run these counter pin and pull looks going into that boundary where they had that awesome touchdown to Liam Talbot, and doggone it, I was so happy to see that moment. Shout out to the London Talbot. Shout out to Papa Ian. Great moment for them. Obviously, him still getting his sea legs back underneath him. But one of the things that I thought they used Domofsky for so effectively was those read option looks then going into, whether it was the quad side or any number of those numbers, into the field. So again, you're trying to limit the impact of what Denny and Patrick do to that boundary, and then take advantage of the fact that Domofsky is a great athlete. And if he can properly read those defensive ends to either hand off to, as we've talked about, and as you highlighted earlier in the season, like arguably, you know, a top 3 running back in the OUA and maybe a top 5 in all of USports running back in Waybe Mambo, now getting Talbot back, Andrew Delaney healthy, and again, not huge numbers, but some clutch runs from him in some big situations. Like, this offense is starting to show the recipe of where they can have success. And then quickly on the other side, Ottawa then utilizing a lot of the double tight to be able to get more bodies to block up that just vaunted pass rush by Windsor. And they still get home 2 times. But honestly, the way things are going, if you get out of a game with Windsor and they've only sacked your quarterback twice, you call that a win. What I felt that limited them with was then, and probably the prospect of trying to get the ball out quicker, was they weren't taking as many deep shots, I found, more sort of working the medium, short game, some over the middle looks, but all the while not getting a darn thing going on the ground in large part, even though you're creating those extra gaps with those tight ends and those extra bodies in there, just Windsor being able to shut the door. But I still thought it was a positive response to how Windsor's been getting after quarterback. So those two aspects of how these coordinators for both clubs were trying to, play off of what they were seeing from the other one, I thought those were really effective moves by these teams.
Yeah, you could tell that the scheme battle going into this one, these coaches had done their homework and they had really thought of inventive ways in order to stop this. And I completely agree with you. The fact that you limit Windsor to only 2 sacks in a game is a huge win because that means that Josh Jansen has a little bit more time to throw the ball and to just stay uncovered. And 26 for 35, 307 yards, 1 touchdown, and yes, the 1 interception. But I think that's a much better game and much closer to what we're coming to expect from Josh Jansen on a consistent level here. So great to see that. But like you mentioned, Suleiman Kamara finishes with 35 yards and Charles Aslan finishes with 23 yards. And they both had longs of like 13 and 11 respectively. So you take that away and it's even worse. This was a Windsor team that really stepped up defensively and has continued to just play lights out ever since. I mean, Ethan John, 10 tackles on the day, including a 1.5 tackles for loss. That's unbelievable from a halfback position. Marco Piccioni, the next closest to him, with 5 tackles in one TFL. Derek Anderson and Ahmad Taylor getting in there for sacks. But this was just another showcase of what this Windsor defense can really do to teams. Pat Donovan, I don't know. We might have to start shifting the mad scientists over to him or giving him some kind of a new nickname because what he's been able to do with this defense time and time again. I know we've said this earlier on in the season as well, but my goodness, does this Windsor defense look incredible?
And a player that I think really came onto our radar with his performance in the first Ottawa game and then showed up big in this one again and I think he plays more of that Sam linebacker for them, but Dylan Simpson. And we always talk about how important having a strong player in that role is to both support the run, the pass. Again, not the box score to knock your socks off, but coming up with some big plays in coverage and just making some of these receivers uncomfortable with Ottawa. Again, trying to run some of these quicker game looks and trying to maybe go over the middle right into his kitchen. And him and Piccioni there in the middle. That's a tough duo to throw into the mix there. I will also say, sort of, maybe I should have said this off the jump. We're obviously used to our guy Brett Hedges with the solo call. So cool that they threw former head coach of the Windsor Lancers, Joe Demore, on the call as well. Though the audio was a bit screwy at the start, they corrected it for the second half and just is specifically in talking about Windsor football, but just as far as him as a football mind, you truly can't get anyone better as the color guy on a play-by-play when you have as good a play-by-play man in Brett Hedges is off the jump. Tom, obviously, we're talking about one of the most entertaining playoff game we had here in the quarterfinals in the OUA. But I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that despite the audio technical issues at the start, what a great, there was so much stuff that I felt I learned in listening to him talk about not just Windsor football in general, but his breakdown of the schemes of these teams. If you are new or just more of a fan of the game as someone who supports, you're a player, whoever that might be, I hope you had a notepad out, just all these different tidbits that Coach Demore was throwing out about the way these teams are playing. It was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you already have somebody who's outstanding calling these games in one Brett Hedges. And when you supplement that with a Joe Demore, who has seen so much and has so much experience and is a great coach himself, my goodness, does that make it a fantastic broadcast for anybody who's listening, especially for guys like you and me who are always constantly trying to learn more and more about the game. And I don't know about yourself, but obviously I've had the chance to call a game with Brett Hedges. But I even start getting honed in on, the individual players, like this person did a great corner route or whatever that means. But you could see Coach Demore is looking at this from, this is what the scheme looks like, and this is what the concept looks like as a whole, and he has that eye for it. So to hear him talk about that, it just made me more knowledgeable on how things were going. So yeah, it was fantastic to get him into the booth with Brett Hedges to call this game.
Absolutely. Going back to the actual Jimmys and Joes on there, we talked about how with how good this defense is, how good the rush game is, the 13 for 20 is a formidable job for what Domofsky can do. And I think partly why we still want to see more is that when you look at this receiving core he has, and Colby Ginn gets 3 receptions, gets in the end zone, Tyreek Quason with that just all world track speed that he has, 4 receptions, 51 yards, the big dog and Trifon playing perhaps as big a role in the blocking scheme as anything, but getting the ball in his hands a few times. And, we've had that conversation all year long of when young quarterbacks or inexperienced quarterbacks have had to step in and they have these, whether it's Evan Basiliga with Waterloo, whether it's Mateo Tuioti with Queens. Trifon's a guy that we probably haven't talked even as much as we should have. Former OUA All-Star in that role as that H-back tight end position was such a monumental spot, and someone who I think, especially with a Queens team coming to town where, we talk about how, like, if you need to beat these top tier teams, you need to be successful at all 3 levels of your offense. By 3 levels, I mean you'd be able to run, you'd be able to pass, you'd be able to use that play action to be able to set up the pass as well. And all the while being able to use Trifon as that safety blanket because, as we've talked about, Domofsky isn't necessarily a young guy anymore in this league, missed a lot of time due to injury, but the way that he was utilizing him, yes, he's essential in the run game, but starting to see a little bit more of just getting into his big guy's hands and just being able to move those chains forward when they really need it.
Yeah, it was great to see. I mean, the way that this offense is being utilized and the way that Domofsky has been playing, it just complements things and how things are going and getting him into the end zone, into that quarterback sneak and everything. It's just great to see. But I do think, like you were mentioning earlier, this receiving core, it feels like it's just waiting to be unleashed and waiting to just be given that opportunity. And I don't know if it's more so just allowing Domofsky to throw the ball up and get it into these guys' hands or just letting them go up for a ball. But when you see the capabilities that these guys have, and Colby Ginn and Tyreek Quason and Mateo Trifon, all names that you mentioned, when the ball is in their hands, or even when Trifon's like bodying guys out to catch that ball and the fall forward for first downs, it's really a sight to behold here. And they're going to need these guys to really step up in key places if they want to go back to back and beating Queens, even if they're traveling to the Win City.
And not even mentioning Kareem Cotton's name in the mix as well as someone who can go off for them. Speaking of receiving cores, obviously with Josh Jansen having the day he's got to be complimented by his group of guys around him. And we know that despite our frustrations in that run game really falling off this year, and as we talk about sometimes with these units, when you're really strong in one aspect, then the lack of success in the other might just be a product of saying, like, for example, the Windsor side of things, it's like, well, you're not going to give Domofsky as many opportunities because why would you not be handing it off to Mambo, to Talbot, and to Delaney as often as you can? And then the flip side for Ottawa is maybe the reason you're not getting as many touches to Suleiman and to Asselin on the ground is because you got guys like Gregoire, like Gilbert Thibault, like Noah Avery, though perhaps one of his lesser performances on the season, and then a guy that we really saw come on the scene big in the first matchup between these teams in Ottawa in Gerard Boucard, really speaks to just the depth that they have there and what makes Jansen such a formidable quarterback, and starts with that O-line giving him the time, and even if they're using double tight looks to slow down this vaunted pass rush, just that statuesque build that he has there and being able to read to his first, second, and third reads and get it out across the field, being able to throw those field outs, even if it's only for a few yards, you're now forcing the defense to respect that. Then that maybe opens up something deep over the top to the field side. Not seeing Romeo Lucier, I think they were saying early on the injury that he had suffered that kept him out for much of the year might have come back to bite him here. Robin Coulio, I don't remember seeing him in this game, whether he's off the box score. And when they have so many receivers out there, it's hard to sometimes keep track of whether a guy's out there just running routes and just not getting targets or not getting catches. But, 2 guys that have played key roles for them. So obviously that's a miss. But at the end of the day, especially against this defense and the secondary, yet you give up that 1 interception, but a strong day for the passing game for them. Though kind of like in the first matchup, it took a little while for it to get going.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at when you look at the caliber of the receivers that Ottawa has, and even if Robin Couillot is out, and I know that he's had some great games, Noah Avery is one of the best receivers that we've seen when he's consistently playing at some of his very best. The 3 catches for 41 yards, certainly being limited by a great defensive secondary that Windsor has, but Emile Gregoire coming through with 7 catches for 135 yards. Tristan Gilbert-Thibault, I mean, 76 yards receiving on 5 catches. There's a lot of great talent with this Ottawa receiving core, and I would have liked to have seen them utilize a little bit more, given a little bit more of a chance, which is interesting for me to say, considering that I mentioned, Jansen's numbers of throwing for 307 yards, I think is more so some of the capabilities that he has, but there's just so many great weapons that he has for this Ottawa in this Ottawa receivers. Just not. I would just like to see them getting the ball a little bit more. And maybe that's just specifically Noah Avery because of what we've seen him able to do in other key scenarios here.
And last thing I want to highlight is though neither of them kind of had opportunities or games to make their numbers jump off the box score, but a great matchup in the kicking game between Brady Lister and Zachary Copeland. In the punting game, both of them getting 3 punts, pinning the other team within the 20, causing long drives for these teams, going 1 for 2 on field goals and going perfect on their extra points. Again, we've seen both these guys rack up into the teens in terms of points that they've been able to accumulate. We know that this has been a record-breaking, record-setting year for Brady Lister, but just a nice matchup from that regard there as well. Tom, obviously this Windsor Lancer team just keeps on rolling and is now, with all their successes late in the season and what they've done now in this first round, gets the opportunity to host a Queens team that they beat a few weeks ago. We'll obviously set that up in our podcast to come. And an Ottawa team that just started off looking like maybe the team that could, as we said, maybe replace Guelph in that second tier as the team that's a cut above the rest of the OUA and maybe has a chance to take a shot at the Westerns, Lauriers of the world. They obviously always play Windsor tough and vice versa. We always talk about that strange thing that they always seem to have Lauriers' number, that they never come up with the big win. But a great game nonetheless, as we've always come to see and come to expect from these two matchups. Final thoughts on this just magnificent duel we had out of Win City?
Yeah, when you start talking about the challenge that Ottawa had to go up against here, this is a Windsor defense that finished with 2 sacks, 13 tackles for loss, a fumble recovery, an interception, and a few pass breakups. Like, that's an outstanding day for a team to have, and that's really what the Ottawa GG's offense went into the teeth of and did pretty damn well, all things considered. Putting up 24 points in this one was a great thing to kind of behold and to see here. This is just... We've had a few people reach out to us on social media, and I know you're not the social media guy here, but they have mentioned, like, we want like a 30 for 30 documentary style on what the hell happened to Ottawa in the latter part of the season. After that, they looked good enough to beat the #1 team in the country in the Laurier Golden Hawks, and I'm sure a lot of Ottawa folks feel like they should have. And then to lose the Panda, to lose to Windsor, in the regular season and then in the playoffs here, it's just such an interesting kind of piece to look at because, you and I were very confidently saying, hey, you know what, this Ottawa squad, because they're not playing Queens, there's a lot of debate, but I'm ready to put them in that like #3 or #4 spot in the entirety of the OUA right after that Laurier game. And then just the fall off has been really incredible here, but they had a good showing in this game. Windsor with another big dub, and I'm so happy for the folks out in Win City. They love those Lancers, and to not only get the win, but with the Guelph win, getting to host another home playoff game, that place is going to be rocking next week when the Gales come to town.
And Tom, I believe you have staked your claim that you will be there in the house for it. I am waiting to see if there's going to be a Game 7 of the World Series happening that evening. And if there is, I am certainly going to limit my travel to Kitchener-Waterloo, so I'm at home watching that game with my pops. Tom, that's a wrap on the OUA quarterfinals. Let's take our talents around the league to see what was going on in the final week of action across U Sports. Just going through the scores off the jump, Friday night saw a thriller out of Regina where the UBC Thunderbirds on the arm of Drew Viotto came up with a massive win, 31-29 in overtime, followed up with a game that was both tighter than the score showed, but in reality could have been way worse with how St. Mary's defense was playing and just nearly coming up with some big plays and interceptions where the Huskies get over their Santa Fe's hump, if you will, take out the X-Men 26-10 on Saturday. Bishops flexes their muscles at home against Acadia, picking up the big win 51-7. Laval and Arnaud Desjardins Les Laval Rouge or still pick up the win against Sherbrooke 26-3. Concordia comes up true against McGill on McGill's homecoming of all days, 31-24. And the Battle of Alberta goes to Calgary 34-29. And Saskatchewan, still without Anton Ammanrud, takes out Manitoba at home. A game that, with Regina having lost on the Friday night, literally had no stakes on the table in terms of seeding, but still picks up the win at home to, well, they had first place secured, but to secure the 7-1 season, 31-12. Tom, obviously our weekend was very preoccupied with a trip out to Kingston and then you coming back to Toronto to be able to check to help cover the run me and Dakota were doing. So not as much time as we typically commit to watching these other games, but where do you want to start in our around the league coverage of the U Sports?
Oh man, we gotta start with UBC in that OT victory. I mean,
Talk about
this this was a UBC squad that with three minutes and 15 seconds left in the fourth quarter, they were down 28-13. And Drew Viotto went off with a couple of touchdown passes, one to Shamar McBean and the other one to Trey Montour with 41 seconds left to tie this thing up and send us to OT. Like I think this is a fantastic showing of what this UBC squad will look like and the potential that they have. I don't know. We'll have to do some digging into Trey Montour and Shamar McBean. I believe both of them might be done, or at least getting up there in terms of their eligibility here. But Drew Viotto, 34 for 52, 423 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the 1 interception. That's really showcasing more of what we've come to expect from this young man. Obviously, they don't really get anything on the ground if the stats are to be believed here, but I don't know that they really needed it when you've got a quarterback that's throwing for 423 yards in this one. And against the Regina Rams team that has shown a real capability to stop the run, and that front seven looks outstanding. To try and go into the back end a little bit more, I think was a smart move by Coach Blake Nill and Coach Kiari Jones for the UBC Thunderbirds. But what a great game.
And for UBC defensively, we've obviously talked about how exciting it's been watching Kinsell Phillip dominate over there, seeing a guy in Malcolm Frazier, who the Western Mustangs obviously wish stuck around in the London area, and their ability to stymie Marshall Erickson, a guy that, the season's now all come to an end. I think still with the amount of time that Anton missed, the presumptive favorite for the Can West MVP, but really stymie him to a game where he only ends up carrying for 88, kept out of the end zone. Peltier with the short yardage run coming in now as that backup quarterback to a guy in Owen Sieben who, not too bad on the day, 238 on 26 completions on 33 attempts, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, but that UBC defense really coming up big to slow down the run, where regardless of whether it's been Sieben or whether it's been Peltier, obviously establishing their offense through the running of Erickson has been what they've been able to, where they've been able to make themselves a team that we've talked about can compete with Sask, possibly compete with Sask, and maybe hoist another Hardy Cup. But UBC being able to slow that rush game down was so impressive to be able to see.
Yeah, I mean, Marshall Erickson being limited to just 88 yards rushing, that is an unbelievable day for this UBC defense when you see this guy who's close to averaging 150 yards, it feels like, on a lot of days here. But you talk about our guy and Kinsale Phillip, 9.5 total tackles. He still leads this UBC team in total tackles on the year. There's not a ton of plays in the backfield here. actually, there's none for this UBC. There's no sacks and no tackles for loss. Ellison getting that one interception on Owen, but a stout performance from a UBC defense that, while yes, let up 28 points in the regular time, was still doing enough, especially in the dying parts of that fourth quarter, to give their offense a chance to get back into this game and really do their work here. A couple of key missed field goals here by one Ty Gorniak. I mean, he finishes the day 1 for 4 on his field goals. If he hits just one more of those, we don't go to overtime and they potentially win this game without UBC getting the chance to. So this was a great showing for the Thunderbirds here and cementing them getting into the playoffs with this big victory. What a huge win for those guys.
It absolutely not only locks in the first spot for Sask, but exactly as you mentioned, that 3-5 record made by the, by the numbers, the Calgary Alberta game. I don't want to say irrelevant for either of these clubs because it's the Battle of Alberta. And frankly, though, again, wasn't able to go back and watch the tape. Really nice showing by Coach Shan's Dinos to finish off the season with a win, despite being eliminated the night before, and not just with what they did offensively. David Jordan, 10 for 30, doesn't get into the end zone, but 217 yards. But being able to slow down Hetlinger, who coming off of their big performance last week was looking like, man, oh man, this guy is, the guy that you've been clamoring for. And not to say that he isn't as a result of this one, but just overall, especially with the team that we've kind of kept going back to that adjective of kind of being a little weird this year with how some of their games break down, and a product of the very veteran half of the team and the very youthful team half of the team. You have those vets maybe saying, it's our last hurrah, and those young guys saying, hey, it's our time to establish what we're going to go into the offseason with and sort of set the tempo in this big provincial matchup. Frankly, I thought that was a really positive showing by this club. Alberta had already been eliminated, and not to say that you still don't give it your all, especially in a rivalry matchup, but specifically for the Dinos, I thought it was awesome for them to come up with this win.
Yeah, you talk about a team that just had weird expectations and just a weird setup and everything. They played some really great football, and there was a lot of games that came down to just a few points here and there. I mean, even when you look at points per game, Calgary finished third in the Can West with 24.4. When you look at the makeup of that team, and especially on the offense where there was a number of first-year players, obviously David Jordan being one of them, that's a great thing to hang your hat on here. And a defense that was looking to be the strong point of this team. I mean, 28, the average giving up 28 points, which is obviously if you're averaging 24 on offense and giving up 28 on defense, that's where a few of those can come into play here. But a team that I think a lot of people looked at being, you're losing a lot of guys. All three of their all-stars from last year who had left this team. And for them to still come out and just be on the cusp of making the playoffs where anything can really happen, as we saw last year with Regina taking it, it was a great testament to the fight that this Calgary Dinos team had. And if not for a couple of bounces here and there, they're beating a Regina Rams team earlier in the season on an overtime victory and a number of other close games. So a great season by Calgary, and I think a lot of promise for this Alberta Golden Bears squad for what the future has.
Most definitely. And though the game wasn't very close, let's talk about Sask beating Manitoba 31-12. Still no Anton, no Jackson Jaczynski either. A few things I want to throw your way as far as this matchup. Number one, honestly, I do think the Marshall Erickson case is really strong, but you were framing the Ethan Jordan case for his not only OUA MVP odds, but then also his Heck Crichton ability, as he not only outdoes his performance from last year where he had an NFL quarterback throwing him the ball, NFL quality quarterback throwing him the ball, words, but that he's able to then do that with a new guy coming into the system who obviously Cal Withers performed as good as anyone in Canada this year. Is he able to do that with the two quarterbacks? Yes, Erickson's had an awesome job running the ball this year for those Rams, but your guy in Daniel Weeb and the year he's put together, being able to play essentially half the season with his dude in Amandrud, but then half the season with Jake Farrell. So I want to ask you a few things here. Number one, honestly, who do you think the Heck Crichton nominee should be out of Can West? And with how banged up some of these other teams are, I mean, Sask being as prominent as any, is this a Huskies team that can still raise a Hardy Cup with Jake Farrell as their starting quarterback?
So a number of things you said in there. When yeah, to start things off with who I think should be the Canada West MVP. I think with Anton Ammanrou being out, I think that kind of eliminates him. He only played in 5 games, so that's a tough thing to really justify from him. And I'm not sure that there's anybody else from a quarterbacking standpoint that had solid enough numbers to really justify that. So to me, it comes down to running back versus quarterback. And Marshall Erickson finished the regular season 163 rushing attempts, 1,026 rushing yards for an average of 128, 11 touchdowns with 4 fumbles and 1 lost.
You don't love the fumbles.
You don't
Definitely
love the fumbles. You don't love the fumbles. But then you look over at my guy Daniel Weeb.
Your guy.
My guy.
Your guy. No question.
60 catches, 926 yards, averaging 115 yards per game with 11 touchdowns himself and along a 69. Nice. This is a guy who is really incredible for what he's doing for the Saskatchewan team. But exactly like you mentioned, a lot of those touchdowns near the end of the season are being thrown to by Jake Farrell, who is still a solid enough quarterback, obviously. He finishes the game, I mean, with 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, 2 of those going to Daniel Weeb, and just showcasing the fact that when you do have a younger quarterback in there, you know what, I'm just going to throw it up to the guy that I know is going to come down with it and be special with it. 7 catches, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns on the day against Manitoba. I mean, you show why he's so important to this Sask Huskies team.
And, you were highlighting it on that jet sweep they gave him last week where he reverses field, gets into the end zone. The quickness, there was a play he had, I think it was the first half, just a ball on the sideline, and just his elusiveness, his quickness is so great. I'm trying to remember, there's one of the many great Muhammad Ali quotes, one of the effect of like, I can turn the light switch off and I'm in bed before the lights turn off type deal. And to add on to the quarterback switch that they've had, and obviously they got a dog in the backfield, a husky, if you will, in Riker Frank, who's as good as anyone. So, you always can play it off like that of saying, well, but he got a great run, got to run the ball with. This is also a Husky team that only got 2 games out of Rhett Varva. On the one hand, you could say, well, that offered more opportunities for him to get those 60 plus receptions. On the other hand, it draws more attention over to the fact that even with Varva in there, Weeb is still the guy who's going to draw more looks, and nothing against the rest of these guys out here. Again, Daniel Kabongo, a guy that, those, Western Mustangs probably wish they were still in their locker room, put that all aside. No Amandrud for nearly half the season, and barely like barely a cup of coffee with Varva on the year. Yeah, I think you add in the fumble piece for Erickson as well, and I feel like I'm with you there as well. Despite literally maybe 5 minutes ago saying the presumptive favorite is Marshall Erickson. Well done, your guy deserves it with gusto with the year he's been putting on, and just the story of the Saskatchewan kid playing for the home school, getting drafted by the provincial team, the home team, I should say, coming back for his final hurrah, though it's in Regina, a provincial hosted Vanier Cup, and they're gonna have in all likelihood a tough Laurier team coming out of the OUA to take them on to get there, but it just has that storybook feeling to it. And golly, again, sports isn't about deserving or anything like that, but it would certainly make for a great story for him to get the job done and not just raise a Can West MVP, but then possibly some other hardware. Tom, let's go to the other coast. I don't really want to talk too much about the Bishops game. Again, nice to see them get back on track. Again, even with the performance, O'Shea Hossein getting in the end zone twice, Quirion 2 touchdowns. I still don't know what to make of the question as far as AUS MVP at this point. Maybe you've done a little bit of diving into it. It almost feels like it needs to be someone, maybe my guy in Kalen Edwards on the defensive side for St. Mary's. But, good to see Bishops get back on track. They have a trip to Antigonish to take on St. FX in the first round of the playoffs. But that battle out of Halifax, again, on the one hand, it's closer than that final score indicates because St. Mary's with those 10 points in the fourth quarter, kind of extending it from a sort of nip and tuck back and forth affair, but also a few plays where, Fagnon, he ends up with a pretty lackluster day, 13 for 25, 192, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And to be honest, he's lucky it wasn't worse with some of the decisions he was making. And again, maybe it wasn't necessarily the decisions he was making, but just like with how fast this defense is for St. Mary's. And, the way you talked about, hey, if you think someone's covered when 24 and the tricolors is in the vicinity, he's not. That's how I feel with, receivers trying to run open against this St. Mary's defense.
Yeah, I think when you come down to the MVP race, I think you might give it to Silas Fagnon because he sets that record of the passing yards in a career, breaks that long-standing one that Larry Justanis had when he was a quarterback at Acadia.
Big
But exactly
Bird.
like you meant, yeah, but exactly like you mentioned, man. 13 for 25, 192 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 picks, and it could have been a whole lot worse if there was those DBs had better hands, as often is said about DBs. But this was a St. Mary's defense that played outstanding, and a very similar case, I think, for this St. Mary's offense, like Windsor's, in that you just have to do enough to get into the end zone a couple of times, and the defense will take care of everything else. I mean, the way that they were flying around the ball, they looked really impressive from start to finish. Isaiah Okoli, 8.5 total tackles and a pass breakup. You've got Amuda at number 14 with 4 tackles, a sack, and a TFL. There's guys who are flying around for this squad for St. Mary's and are blanketing teams, and we've seen it throughout the year so far. But getting a chance to actually watch this game live, it was incredible to see what the St. Mary's squad was able to do here. Justin Shibley, 16 for 23, 124 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Not exactly a blow the socks off kind of day, but again, just doing enough to get St. Mary's into position. Malik Williams, 100 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Liam Leggy, 78 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Maybe that's enough for the St. Mary's squad. Maybe that's all they really need. An outstanding performance from a defense and an offense that just does enough to get up by a few scores and keep it that way. But man, this AUS really looks like it's St. Mary's to lose.
Well, and Cherokee Robinson, who, doesn't have an astonishing day by the numbers, but boy, oh boy, is he fast when he gets the ball in his hands. Call it recency bias. I don't know what to call it. I mean, St. Mary's, again, send me a number 8 St. Mary's jersey and I'll wear that thing all day long, or just any swag of any kind. It obviously, these two teams have played each other, 3 times, including a preseason game, and St. FX is up 2-1 in that matchup, and St. Mary's is going to be, and the other two, I believe, were the preseason game and the early regular season game were both in Antigonish, and St. Mary's books their ticket to host what would be that game. Sorry, Acadia, I don't foresee the upset for you in the cards, and so I don't mean to overlook what could go down in a Loney Bowl with St. Mary's hosting. I'm going to say probably St. FX, them getting to host Bishops and how they played so far this year. I don't want to overlook the fact that St. FX can say, like, dude, we've beaten these guys twice. Like, if our offense gets rolling, I believe Zachary Hood was injured in this one. That limits their offense. But, hey, man, the year that Devin Blackwood's been having, he is really strong for them as well. And obviously on the ground with Bussey and Fogarty, though, again, Bussey's numbers, decent. Fogarty really limited on the day. They still have the potential to go off at any point. But I say all this in saying that St. Mary's, and especially we'll talk a bit about the RCQ games in a moment, and a Laval team that, we don't know the status of Arnaud Desjardins, but he missed that last game. Maybe it was just a function of the game didn't really matter. Like the outcome, I think they secured first place either way. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but they just believe that they can still beat a Sherbrooke team without him. Similarly to Regina last year, this is a St. Mary's team that, from the defensive standpoint, I believe can play a competitive game with whoever comes out of the RSEQ. Offensively, that's where I'm worried. But if that defense can have, as good an outing as they've had and maybe put themselves in position where you can go to some of these playmakers they have, Malik Williams, whether it's him on the ground, Cherokee Robinson, and again, Shibley doing, as we talk about with some of these other quarterbacks, enough without turning the ball over. Because, of course, the question isn't necessarily, it's not always can you slow down those offenses out of the RCQ. Can you do anything against them defensively? And we're already knowing that this is a St. Mary's team that certainly aren't world beaters. Like, they put up nice numbers when they're playing Acadia and when they're playing Mount Allison and Bishops, who again last year had an all-world defense. This defense is good enough, I'll say, to get them into a Vanier Cup. Whether they can beat that team, whoever it is out of the RSQ, remains to be seen, but it's not a walkover team. And again, they still have to get out of the AUS against the team presumptively in Santa Fe that has given them trouble. But with how they look defensively on this game, man, it is a cool St. Mary's Husky team. That's so nice to see this club back into that territory that, going back to your conversation with Coach Nill out at UBC, we got that history lesson, if for those of us who, weren't as familiar with just how much of a powerhouse that conference was with that team at the helm going back to the 2000s. Tom, RSEQ, obviously we had Montreal had already wrapped up their season, losing to Laval the week prior, the 6-2 record. McGill with the loss to Concordia. Again, probably going back to that sort of Jekyll and Hyde piece that we've come to sort of learn about them on the year. And Laval, having to go to, a backup quarterback to be able to pick up the win, but still does so with limited success. Frankly, I'm surprised that they weren't getting the ground game going. We saw obviously how productive Vital and Roy were earlier in the season, a bit more limited on this day. But overall, not a terribly exciting matchup there. What's your read on these two games? Again, we didn't really get to dive into them in great detail, but just from how we've been following so far this year.
Well, we've been hearing a little bit here, and was pointed out to me, Sherbrooke has a very strange home field where it's grass for the most part, and then the end zones are the turf, the kind of fake turf, whatever. So it can be a little jarring for teams to play on, and maybe that's why that Laval rushing attack, along with a great Sherbrooke defense, rush defense, why it took them a little bit longer to get things going. But you want to talk about great defenses. Jeremy Fife for Sherbrooke, 11 for 32, 96 yards, no touchdowns, and 3 picks. That Laval defense, the Rouge-et-Or defense this year, and every year, but this year in particular, man, do they look good, and they are impressive with how dominant that they can be in this setting here. I mean, I love to have seen Ouellette, quarterback for Laval, 17 for 22, 222 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Not blow your socks off by any means, but when you've got a defense like that, it's playing some of its best football in the time that you absolutely need it to. It was just great to see. I mean, this is a defense. We read out some other great numbers. 16 tackles for loss against Sherbrooke, living in the backfield and really able to do some great stuff. And you talk about, as a coach, you and I pulling our hair out saying, man, how can we get anything done if we can't get the freaking ball past the line of scrimmage here? So a great showing by Laval, and certainly when you talk about momentum going into the playoffs, coming off of a big victory against the Carabin and then a solid victory against Sherbrooke, you put yourself in a really great spot to go for the first ever Dussault Cup.
For McGill, despite this loss, not to get ahead of the review podcast for next week, still, based on whatever tiebreakers it were that, it came down to, and didn't go into the detail of it, still books their ticket into the Dussault Cup playoffs to go into Laval. With how good we've seen at the top of their game, that rushing attack of, La Tendresse Regimbol and Jerry Momo, in terms of rushing the ball, picking themselves up a win against Montreal, even as great as that defense has been for Laval, and with Ouellette having a good game for them, but obviously not the talent that we know, that the ceiling we know that they get with Desjardins. Despite the loss, there's something kind of interesting again if Desjardins is out of the prospect of this McGill team that it just very much feels like that high floor, high ceiling, low floor type team.
Yeah, you look at a McGill squad that it's almost a bit Jekyll and Hyde, depending on which team you're really going to see here. I mean, Jerry Momo still finishes with 153 yards on the ground, which is outstanding, but ELR 11 for 25 in the air, 207 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions, and held to just 40 yards on the ground. Certainly not the numbers that we have come to see from them in this rushing game. And I think in order to beat the Lavals or Montreals of the world, you have to have that rushing attack beyond its very, very best here. And this is a Concordia team that has really showed some flashes of brilliance and some less than stellar performances, but in this game, Antoine Oumet, 16 for 22, 225 yards and a touchdown, and Frank Tchembe, running back, 16 attempts for 161 on the ground, and then Oumet himself for another 95 and 3 touchdowns. Like, this was an incredible job on the ground in particular from this Concordia squad as well. And I'm just interested to see which McGill team comes out to play in this playoff setting here, going up against the Laval squad with how good that rush defense is and the front seven coached up. I'm sure while Coach Constantine is not directly coaching the defense, him being a former defensive lineman, he does not want anybody to be able to rush the ball, especially up the middle there. So we're going to have to see ELR in the passing attack complement what he's able to do on the ground. And I just don't know if it's going to be good enough right now in order to upset the behemoth that is the Rouge et Or.
For what it's worth, it's a McGill team that, yes, at home, was able to put up 21 points on Laval, which is like vastly greater than the numbers that they've been giving up there. But again, speaks to, as you said, that sort of Jekyll and Hyde nature of this team. Tom, I think we call it a wrap there. Fantastic job by you as always, not just on the pod, but all weekend, doing the Lord's work, driving all over Ontario while I take naps in my role as passenger princess and as the sleepy panda that I am. Final thoughts on the quarterfinal action in the OUA and the final week of USports action from our 3 other conferences.
Well, it's a real testament to how incredible you and JT are as travel companions that I already forgot, or I didn't have to focus as much on the beatdown that the Golden Gales gave to my Marauders. But it was an incredible weekend, my friend. Anytime I get to see your beautiful face, it always puts a smile on mine. And what a great weekend of football across USports. It's sad to see some of these teams with their seasons coming to an end, both in the OUA playoffs and around the league here. But as I've said before, we are getting into the meat of the best football that we will see all year.
You're darn right. It's playoff action across USports. We got the semifinals coming up in the OUA, and well, I guess it's semifinals and all the other semifinals all across the league. Our darn massive OUA league with our 11 teams takes a little bit longer. I can't wait to be breaking down with you later on this week right here at the 55.